Jack Smith detonates a last-minute evidence bomb. DOJ instantly shifts to emergency alert status.
Inside, sources say Trump loses it behind closed doors, demanding answers after seeing the filings for the first time.
The new documents reportedly show Trump knew the fraud claims were false and pushed them anyway, sparking internal panic.
Okay, hold on. What just happened inside the Department of Justice tonight is not normal. And honestly, the fact that so few people are even talking about it makes it 10 times worse. Because while the headlines are screaming about Jack Smith dropping the federal election interference case, what they're not telling you is that Smith didn't walk away empty-handed. He walked away and left behind the most devastating collection of evidence ever assembled against a former president. And here's the part that no one seems to appreciate. If Donald Trump had not won the 2024 election, the DOJ believed this evidence was more than enough to convict him. Not maybe, not possibly, enough to convict. That's not my phrase. That's straight from Jack Smith's own final report. But stay with me, because that's not even the shocking part. The real shock is what happened inside Trump's inner circle when this thing landed. Because multiple outlets, NBC, ABC, AP, are all circling the same point. Trump saw the full evidence file for the first time, and he reportedly lost it. And look, when you realize what's inside that file, the reaction suddenly makes sense. We're talking about sworn testimony from Trump's closest advisors, people he actually trusted, saying point blank that he knew his voter fraud claims were false, that he called them crazy, that he admitted privately that there was no evidence, and then he used those same false claims publicly to pressure state officials, the Justice Department, and his own vice president.
But here's where things get strange, because in the hours after the evidence file hit the docket, senior officials at the DOJ began internally flagging, quote, immediate internal implications. No one is using the phrase emergency alert publicly, but the reporting is clear. This evidence drop triggered a scramble inside Main Justice to figure out how the department is supposed to function under a president who, according to the DOJ's own prosecutors, attempted to overturn an election. And yet, this is the part they hope you don't notice. Jack Smith didn't just dismiss the case. He left behind a roadmap, a blueprint, hundreds of pages documenting a coordinated pressure campaign, the fake electors plot, and testimony from witnesses who flipped, yes, flipped, on Trump. And the political implications? Let's just say Republicans are reading the same documents and they're terrified of what happens if the public actually understands what's in them. But hold on, because there's an even bigger contradiction buried underneath all of this. Trump's lawyers are still out there claiming he acted in good faith. But the DOJ's evidence shows the exact opposite. The documents prove he was told again and again that the claims were false. And yet he went ahead anyway. So here's the question no one in Trump world wants to answer. How do you defend good faith when your own staff says you knew the claims were lies? And trust me, this is just the surface. What comes next is genuinely shocking. And what's wild is that as this evidence file becomes public, the argument that Trump's team has been clinging to for months, that he was simply raising legitimate concerns about the election, falls apart in real time. Because the documents don't just show a difference of opinion, they show a coordinated effort built on claims that Trump was repeatedly told were false. And that matters because intent is the core of the DOJ's case. You can't accidentally pressure a Secretary of State to find votes. You can't unintentionally create a scheme to submit fake electors. And you definitely don't do it after your own advisors tell you the claims you're using are baseless. But again, this is the part they're hoping you don't see. Because when Jack Smith laid all of this out, he also laid out something else. The names, the people, the insiders who told investigators exactly what happened behind those closed doors. We're talking about senior campaign advisors, White House lawyers, state-level coordinators, and even close allies who were central to the pressure campaign. When the evidence file references multiple cooperating witnesses, that isn't background noise. That is the DOJ saying insiders flipped. And here's why that scares the Trump orbit. Because once insiders flip,
The story you tell publicly no longer matters. The only thing that matters is the paper trail. And that trail, as Smith documented, runs straight back to Trump.
But hold on, because the timing here is the real kicker. Jack Smith moved to dismiss the federal case the moment it became clear that Trump would be sworn in again, citing DOJ's longstanding policy that a sitting president can't be criminally prosecuted. And look, the policy is not new. It's from the Office of Legal Counsel. It's been in place for decades. But here's the contradiction they're hoping you overlook. Dismissing the case doesn't make the evidence disappear. The evidence isn't erased, the report isn't deleted, the public record isn't wiped clean. It simply means the DOJ won't move forward during Trump's presidency. And that distinction is crucial, because the report itself explicitly says the evidence was strong enough to sustain a conviction. And if that line sounds familiar, it's because it's been repeated across outlets. ABC, AP, Time, The Guardian, they all reported the same thing. The DOJ believed the case was winnable, that the legal theory was strong, that the evidence was overwhelming. And yet, because of the election outcome, the case is paused. Not dismissed on the merits, paused because the defendant is about to become the president again. And that is a political earthquake that we're somehow not talking about enough. Because if the only reason the United States did not prosecute a former president for attempting to overturn an election is that he's about to be sworn in again, what does that say about the system? What does that say about accountability? What does that say about the precedent we just set?
And yet, here's the part that really matters. The evidence file doesn't just outline what Trump did, it outlines what people around him tried to prevent. You have officials who refused to go along. You have advisors who privately called the fake electors plot insane. You have people who literally drafted resignation letters because they couldn't be part of what was happening. And those names, those voices, are now in the case file, which means the public is getting a window into the most important question. What did Trump know and when did he know it? And according to this evidence, he knew everything. He knew the fraud claims were false. He knew there was no legal path. He knew the fake elector scheme required people to break the law, and he went ahead anyway. And yet, watch the response from Republicans over the next few days. Watch how they talk about this. You'll hear witch hunt, you'll hear political persecution, you'll hear weaponization, but what you won't hear is anyone addressing the substance. No one will say, actually, the fake electors were real electors, because they weren't. No one will say, actually, DOJ officials supported Trump's claims, because they didn't. No one will say, actually, the evidence file exonerates Trump, because it does the opposite. So instead, they'll fall back on the safest talking point in the world: blame the system, blame the media, blame the process, but never engage with the evidence because the evidence is devastating.
And this is leading us directly to the chaos for watching inside the DOJ. Because imagine being a career prosecutor, reading that your office has concluded, after years of investigation, that a president attempted to overturn an election. And then imagine having to operate under that president again. That's the crisis unfolding behind the scenes. It's not about policy. It's not about political appointees. It's about the Department of Justice as an institution suddenly having to function under someone it believes committed crimes against the country. And that tension between the institution and the presidency is exactly why insiders described the internal atmosphere as scrambling, uncertain, and alert. Not because Trump is going to be arrested tomorrow, but because the DOJ just released a historic statement of fact that the evidence supported prosecution. And here's the twist nobody saw coming: the classified documents case. Because while the public has been focused on the election interference case, the classified documents case followed the exact same pattern. Evidence laid out, case dismissed due to DOJ policy, and a final report from Jack Smith documenting behavior that would have gone before a jury if not for Trump's return to office. So that means two separate federal cases were effectively paused, not cleared, not debunked, paused because the defendant became president. And both cases contain evidence that legal experts across the political spectrum said would have been compelling at trial. So the question becomes, what does it mean when accountability is conditional on an election? What does it mean when the justice system can say, we have the evidence, but also we can't act on it right now? That's the structural contradiction driving everything happening behind the scenes.
And yeah, this is wild.
The evidence file confirms what many suspected but few could prove, that Trump acknowledged privately that the fraud claims were baseless, that he used language like crazy, that he dismissed advisors who brought him actual facts, that he gravitated towards the people who told him what he wanted to hear, even if those people had no evidence, no legal theory, and no credibility. That pattern isn't just political chaos. It's direct evidence of intent. And that is why Trump reportedly reacted so strongly. Because once intent is proven, defenses collapse. Immunity doesn't apply after his presidency. Advice of counsel evaporates. And the argument that he was merely expressing concerns becomes irrelevant. But let me say this clearly. This evidence file is not just a legal document. It's a political alarm bell. It forces Republicans to confront a reality they've been avoiding for years. It forces the DOJ to confront a future in which the president they investigated now controls the department. And it forces the country to confront a moment where the rule of law is being tested in ways we've never seen. And the fact that this evidence is now public, available for anyone to read, means the political consequences are only beginning. And because this is moving so fast, there's a piece of this puzzle almost no one is talking about. And when you understand this part, everything else suddenly snaps into focus. And it's this. Jack Smith didn't simply document Trump's actions. He documented everyone else's reactions to Trump's actions. And that matters more than people realize, because prosecutors don't just prove what a defendant did, they prove what the people around the defendant understood. And in this case, the evidence file shows wave after wave of people inside the administration, the campaign, the DOJ, and even Trump's own legal team expressing alarm. Alarm that the legal theories were non-existent. Alarm that the fraud claims were fabricated. Alarm that the pressure on state officials was improper. And alarm that the fake elector scheme crossed a bright legal line. When the people responsible for carrying out the plan are describing it as insane, dangerous, and completely illegal, that's not background commentary. That's intent. Because if everyone around you is telling you that what you're doing is illegal and you keep going anyway, that's the definition of intent. And look at who these people were. These weren't Democrats. These weren't activists. These weren't never Trump Republicans. These were Trump allies, Trump appointees, Trump insiders, the people he relied on, the people he elevated, the people he trusted with power. When they tell investigators, we told him repeatedly the evidence didn't exist, that's devastating. Because you can't argue you were misled by the deep state when your own team, handpicked by you, documented that they warned you. But here's the part that's even more devastating. Some of those same insiders continued to publicly defend Trump after giving those warnings. And that contradiction, what they said privately versus what they said publicly, is now part of the evidentiary record. Imagine trying to build a defense when your own staff contradicts themselves in a way that perfectly proves the prosecution's point.
But that contradiction is exactly why this evidence file is sending shockwaves through the DOJ, because the department now has a written record of top officials making decisions based on political pressure, not legal reality. And that's a nightmare scenario for any institution that prides itself on independence. Imagine being in that building knowing you may soon be reporting to someone whose actions, according to your own department, could have resulted in conviction. That's the internal crisis no one wants to say out loud. It's not about ideology. It's about legitimacy. How does the DOJ maintain legitimacy when its own findings say an incoming president engaged in criminal conduct? And remember, this isn't just about the election interference case. It's about the larger ecosystem Trump created, an environment where legal norms were broken, pressure campaigns were normalized, and the boundaries of executive power were pushed to the breaking point. And yet, because this story keeps twisting, there's an even deeper layer here. When the DOJ says a sitting president cannot be prosecuted, that policy is designed not to protect the president, it's designed to protect the presidency as an institution. It's supposed to prevent a future where prosecutors drag the president into court every time there's a political dispute. But Trump's actions are not a political dispute. They're a legal question. And by tying the DOJ's hands, the policy creates a paradox. The more severe the conduct, the more insulated the president becomes through the act of being reelected. Think about that contradiction. The only reason the DOJ couldn't move forward with a case that they believed could secure a conviction is because the target won the presidency. That's the paradox Jack Smith implicitly highlighted. It's not about Trump winning legally, it's about accountability losing structurally. And here's where this gets even stranger. While Republicans are out there celebrating the dismissal as some kind of vindication, they're ignoring the fact that the DOJ's final report is one of the most damning documents ever filed against a president. It lays out motive, it lays out opportunity, it lays out knowledge, it lays out intent, it lays out the pressure on DOJ officials, it lays out the pressure on state officials, it lays out the strategy meetings about fake electors, it lays out Trump acknowledging the claims were false, and it lays out insider testimony that frankly leaves no ambiguity. Which raises the question, if this is what the evidence looks like publicly, what does the evidence look like privately? Because the DOJ didn't publish everything. They published what they could, and the rest, the interviews, the documents, the emails, are still with the department. Imagine the panic inside Trump's team knowing there are hundreds of pages that the public hasn't seen. But even more than that, think about what this means for the political landscape, because the Republican Party has spent years tying itself to Trump's narrative. And now that narrative is contradicted by sworn testimony, not from Democrats, but from Trump's own people. How do you reconcile that? How do you tell voters that the stolen election was real when every meaningful witness said it wasn't? How do you sustain a political movement on a premise that collapses under its own evidence? That's the existential threat Republicans are facing, not because Trump will be prosecuted tomorrow, but because the foundation of their messaging has just been shattered by the DOJ's own findings. And still there's another twist, because this story keeps producing them. The evidence file explicitly states that Trump's claims had no factual basis. Not weak evidence, not inconclusive evidence, no factual basis. And that language wasn't chosen lightly. Prosecutors use that phrase when they want to make something unmistakably clear. They're saying the fraud claims weren't an exaggeration or a misunderstanding. They were false, and Trump knew they were false. That fact alone obliterates his public defense, because if you know the truth and choose to ignore it, your actions aren't protected by the First Amendment. Your actions are a conspiracy, a plan, a deliberate attempt to overturn the election. And when you look at the legal opinions in the report, they spell that out with surgical precision. But the part that still blows my mind, and probably Trump's too, is the witnesses, because Trump's team built its public defense on the idea that no one close to him ever contradicted him. But the evidence file shows the opposite. It shows advisors privately warning him. It shows campaign lawyers refusing to sign off. It shows DOJ officials threatening to resign. It shows state officials receiving calls that prosecutors now say were improper at best, criminal at worst. And it shows Trump pushing forward anyway. That paints a picture not of someone who believed his claims, but someone who believed the claims didn't matter. The outcome mattered. The power mattered. The narrative mattered. The truth didn't.
And the consequence of that mindset is now sitting in the DOJ's archive in the form of a report that documents arguably the most direct case of presidential misconduct since Watergate. And arguably worse, because Watergate was about a burglary and a cover-up. This was an attempt to overturn the election itself. And the fact that the system's internal guardrails held barely doesn't make the conduct less serious. It makes the danger clearer. And that is exactly why the DOJ's internal atmosphere is tense. Not because something is about to happen, but because something already did. But the moment that truly captures all of this, the one line in the final report that will be quoted for decades is this: had the defendant not been elected, the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. That's the DOJ, in writing, saying the only thing standing between Trump and federal prosecution is the election outcome. And that's not just unprecedented. It's a warning about what happens when the rule of law collides with political reality, a warning about what happens when accountability is contingent on timing, a warning about what happens when legal facts meet political power. And yet, even after all of this, there's one more angle, a piece almost everyone has overlooked,
that pushes this entire story into even more uncharted territory.
And its overlooked angle that changes everything. Jack Smith didn't only document what Trump did and what his advisors warned him about, he captured in real time the stress fractures inside American institutions, the pressure on the DOJ, the panic inside state governments, the alarms inside the White House counsel's office, the people who tried to stop the plan, the people who tried to enable it, and the people who watched the train coming and were too afraid to say anything. What Smith created wasn't just a legal roadmap, it was an institutional MRI, a scan that shows exactly where American democracy cracked and exactly where it held. And that's the part that should terrify Trump the most. Because while his team is celebrating the dismissal, the DOJ's final report is now a permanent entry in American history. Anyone can read it. Future prosecutors can refer to it. Congress can cite it. State attorneys general can use it. Journalists can dig through it. And when you strip away the political noise, the facts are devastating. They show a president who understood the truth, rejected it, embraced lies, weaponized those lies, pressured officials, and pursued a strategy that even his own allies refused to touch.
Here's the quieter, more dangerous implication. This report also signals to every state prosecutor in the country that the federal government has effectively said, we can't act right now, but the conduct was criminal. States aren't bound by DOJ's immunity policy. States aren't prevented from prosecuting a sitting president for state-level crimes. And states have already shown they are willing to pursue accountability when the federal government is limited. Georgia, New York, Michigan, Nevada. Those cases came from state systems, not federal. And when they look at the DOJ's findings, especially the sections documenting the pressure on state officials and the fake elector scheme, it opens a door that Trump's team desperately wants to keep closed. But that's not even the biggest threat. The biggest threat is time. Because timing is the only thing protecting Trump right now. The moment he leaves office, whether that's 4 years from now or sooner, the immunity shield vanishes. The DOJ's report remains. The evidence remains. The witness testimony remains. The emails remain. The phone logs remain. And every prosecutor knows that a fully assembled federal case file, already vetted by a special counsel and deemed strong enough to convict, is waiting in the archive. That's why legal experts keep saying Trump ran out the clock, because this isn't absolution. It's deferral.
And watch Trump's rhetoric closely over the next few months, because it's already shifting. He's not pushing the fraud claims as aggressively as he once did, because he knows the evidence contradicts him. Instead, he's focusing on the weaponization of government, which is the only narrative that survives the DOJ's findings. But even that narrative has a problem. The evidence file shows he wasn't targeted. He was investigated because people inside his own orbit reported what was happening. You can't claim you were victimized by the system when the system was reacting to your staff documenting criminal conduct. And the political implications of that are enormous, because Republican lawmakers are now trapped in the most uncomfortable position imaginable. They have to defend Trump while avoiding direct engagement with the evidence. And that's why their talking points are now focused on process. The case was dismissed, the DOJ is corrupt, the timing is suspicious, but the merits completely ignored, because the merits aren't on their side. If they talk about the evidence, they undermine themselves. If they ignore the evidence, they undermine their credibility. And so the entire party is caught in a loop where they can't tell the truth, can't defend the lie, and can't escape the consequences. But there's a deeper political cost coming, one that Republicans haven't fully accounted for yet. Because the DOJ's report doesn't just document Trump's conduct, it documents the conduct of the people who enabled him. The members of Congress who coordinated messaging, the lawyers who drafted fake elector memos, the officials who tried to replace DOJ leadership, the campaign operatives who admitted privately that the claims were false. That's not just a Trump problem. That's a party problem. And once the public begins to understand the structure of the scheme, the political fallout spreads far beyond one man.
And here's the moment that crystallizes everything. The DOJ's line that the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction wasn't written for the news cycle. It was written for history. It was written for future prosecutors. It was written for Congress. It was written for the American public. It was a warning, not about what Trump will do, but about what the system must prepare for. It says this happened. It was illegal, and the only thing preventing accountability was timing,
not innocence. And so when people frame this as Jack Smith admitting defeat, they've completely missed the point. Smith didn't close the book. He handed the country the book. He handed prosecutors the blueprint. He handed future generations the evidence. And he forced every institution in America to confront the question they've been avoiding, which is what happens when the justice system proves criminal conduct, but political power prevents accountability? That question doesn't go away. It only gets louder. And that's why Trump reacted the way he did, because deep down, he knows what the report means. He knows the evidence is overwhelming. He knows the witnesses were credible. He knows the internal reactions were damning. And he knows that every line in that report is a countdown, not to prosecution today, but to the moment his immunity ends. And when that moment comes, the evidence will still be there, and so will the consequences.